Look, I've got Chay Bowes, the legendary political commentator, master of arts in geopolitics, and nowadays to be found in Moscow, and the best informed analyst, commentator on events in Russia and Ukraine in the English language today. Chay, welcome to the show. Let's start in Ukraine, if we may. Reports, and I've seen them from you and from many other sources, that as much or as many as half of the cabinet of Zelensky have resigned today. Are these the last days of the dictator Zelensky?
Well, hello, George, and thanks for having me on. Again, always great to hear from you and great to hear your voice. You're a very important voice of dissent and of justice, and God bless you and long may you continue your work. Regarding the recent resignations and sackings, now we know that with Dmytro Kuleba, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the most senior diplomat in Ukraine, and I've done a lot of research into this. He was basically, thrown under the bus. He was told he was leaving. We don't know exactly the details as to why, but he, along with a raft of fairly senior government ministers and deputy prime ministers, including those for European and NATO integration, for the reintegration of, temporarily occupied territories, as the Ukrainians would call it, meaning Crimea. People in the Ministry of the Environment, a huge raft. We think about 7 so far in the last 48 hours basically have gone. But Kuleba is by far the biggest fish of these. Interestingly, also, the head of the Air Force was sacked after the loss of the first F-16 and its very, very precious pilot. Rumors that it was the American Patriot air defense system that actually shot it down. No, nothing from the Russian Ministry of Defense here, so we have to look into that very carefully as well. And Zelensky wields the axe very quickly. He's a very tempestuous character, we believe. He's also a man now who is isolated among his own cabinet, we believe, and we were told this by General Zaluzhny's people when he was axed. So it doesn't, as you know, as a veteran politician, this doesn't smell of stability. And it comes at a time when this Kursk misadventure, exceptionally costly, well over 8,000 Ukrainian men have been killed in Kursk, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. Absolutely needless waste of life, as is all of this wasted life in the absence of a peace plan, which we know our friend Boris Johnson and other dynamos of this conflict in London have been eager to prevent peace. Huge amounts of Western material lost in Kursk. Terrible acts of brutality against the civilian population, attacking civilian farm workers, bombing cities and towns, as they are as in Belgorod and Bryansk as well. And then in the east, we have a exceptionally fast, rapid advance westwards by Russian shock troops, if you like, around Pokrovsk in the Donbass region. Enveloping towns and villages. I mean, the amount of towns and settlements being taken on a daily basis now, it's actually hard to keep up with. Western media, of course, isn't talking about that, but they're very carefully now introducing the narrative. Is this gamble by Zelensky in Kursk a wise one? Is he losing in Ukraine because he's winning in Russia? When the Western sort of client media, and we know that the Western media, the mainstream narrative, is centrally controlled. When they are even openly and adopting a very cautious tone about this, last roll of the dice by Zelensky, and then we see these high-level, very rapid purges in Zelensky's group, and in very important regions and areas. The head of the Justice Department gone as well. So it doesn't stink or smell of stability. It doesn't bode well. And as winter comes in Ukraine, the energy infrastructure has been targeted, we know, and you won't see, that's not the end of that targeting, I would imagine. Russia trying to target critical infrastructure to try and bring the military industrial capacity of Ukraine, who are advertising that they're bringing in Rheinmetall from Germany to build tanks, that they're building a long-range ballistic missile with which to attack Russia and Moscow and St. Petersburg. Russia has responded by attacking that infrastructure, as they did in Poltava, attacking a big electronic warfare training base. So all of these things, if you zoom out and look, it doesn't look good for Vladimir Zelensky. A lot of people predict, oh, Ukraine is on the verge, it's on the edge. Remember, Ukraine has over 50 countries funneling huge amounts of cash, weapons, and moral, political, and of course financial support, as I say, into Ukraine. So anyone predicting that Ukraine will collapse in the next number of days, months, weeks, I think is somewhat naive, because I think the West will escalate its aid in order to prevent the terrible vista where people like Ursula von der Leyen, Boris Johnson, Bill, Joe Biden et al. And his group of regime change advocates, to prevent them having to actually say, look, we got it wrong in Ukraine. We destabilized the country. We got into bed with some very nasty characters, as is par for the course with the CIA regime change. They get into bed with anybody to inflict what they believed was going to be a strategic defeat on Russia. The Russian economy is growing. The Russian military has evolved and is winning in the east and holding the Ukrainian desperate incursion in Kursk. It's not going anywhere. They're losing a lot of men and material. So rather than have to accept that openly, and particularly in an election year, George, you'll remember the Nixon era, and you'll remember how that war was perpetuated by Nixon because he didn't want to lose a war in an election year. The exact same applies to Kamala Harris, who's recently said that she wants the American military to be the most lethal on earth. They've got trouble in Gaza, as we know. They haven't defeated Hamas. Their proxy, Israel, hasn't defeated Hamas. Russia is anything but defeated. It's actually getting stronger economically. It's not isolated. The Eastern Economic Forum is ongoing as we speak. Over 70 countries represented there. China and Russia have been, if you like, welded together by this ignorant and foolish foreign policy of the EU and the United States as a mega power, basically, nuclear-wise. Economically, the biggest manufacturing economy in the world, China, aligned with Russia, with its massive energy reserves, its continental landmass. This is an exceptionally foolhardy misadventure from the West, but I don't see them queuing up to say, look, we got it wrong, let's have peace. I suggest that they will probably try and escalate and push further and further, that Russia may be forced to do something drastic in Ukraine. I don't see Vladimir Putin, this exceptional statesman and veteran politician, doing anything according to the Western timetable or playbook. He's not going to be. His hand won't be forced, and he's shown that with Kursk. Keep on mission in Donbass, achieve our goals in Ukraine, and people here believe and trust him, and they believe he's the right man for the job, and life goes on here. General Syrskyi, an interesting point. General Syrskyi, the Russian-born and trained commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, said about 48 hours ago, he said, look, if our plan was to distract Russia from its massive assault in the east, which is rolling forward over our defenses, the defenses that have been there since 2014, if the plan was to distract the Russians from that stated aim, it has failed. And that's the head of the Ukrainian armed forces admitting that the main reason and rationale for this suicidal incursion into Kursk was to distract the Russians. It's absolutely failed. So that's coming directly from Syrskyi. Take that with the political upheavals, and you will understand and maybe be able to add to the relevance of that more than me as a veteran politician. What does that mean when a leader wields the axe like that? Take all those things in context, and it doesn't look good. It looks like the walls are definitely closing in on Zelensky.
Well, a night of the long knives seldom leads to prosperity, in my experience. The Zelensky demand that Mongolia should arrest President Putin on his arrival in Ulaanbaatar spectacularly backfired. Instead of being met with policemen with handcuffs, he was met with all the splendor that the heirs of Genghis Khan could muster. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, of course, the Ukrainians have now said that there will be consequences for Mongolia, this huge country in Russia's east. it borders on theater, and sort of it's parody as reality, really. Of course, Mongolia is exceptionally reliant on Russian energy, technology, and trade. And basically, what the Mongolians have said is, look, sorry, but we're not sorry. We're not going to enact a grossly flawed theatrical arrest warrant on Vladimir Putin for moving children from a war zone into safety. We're not going to be doing that. It's never going to happen. And of course, in the absence of any sort of action against Vladimir Putin, there was huge pomp and ceremony. You know, the Mongolian mounted cavalry meeting him. It's been a huge PR success for Mongolia and for Russia. And again, this is all in the context of what the Western perception is of Russia. The very isolated think tank fantasy of the West that anybody who borders Russia is really going to tackle it economically or enact one of these ludicrous sort of politically motivated arrest warrants from the international community is absolutely deluded. Trade in Russia is booming. There's a building boom as we speak in the big cities in Russia. There are huge amounts of immigrants coming into the country now, millions and millions of them to work in Russia's industries and services. So you've got a burgeoning economy here, and Mongolia is a part of that. And of course, Mongolian trade has also increased because of the Western sanctions. This is one of the most insane realities, which people like von der Leyen and Borrell will never tell you about, is that countries who border Russia, who are still friendly to Russia, have seen huge increases in their trade into Russia via third countries. Because your Coca-Cola you're drinking in Moscow now has come through Kazakhstan, it's come through Mongolia, it's come through from China. But it's still here. So these self-harm sanctions, they're in many ways defined by the fact that Volkswagen now has this iconic German, car manufacturer, one of the beating heart, the engine of the German economy, has announced that it may be shutting its plants, and this is all to do with this dismemberment of the Nord Stream pipeline. But regarding Mongolia, Mongolia has done what's right for its people, and I've written that, and that's what I published on my social media. That maybe the Western powers who are crying about Vladimir Putin should be doing the same. They should be thinking about what about the welfare of our people, particularly coming into the winter in places like Germany, as you mentioned, a dark winter ahead. But Mongolia has definitely, in my view, taken the right side by saying, look, it's a political thing. We want to maintain friendly relations with everybody in the West and in the East, and we certainly won't be rocking the boat with our biggest economic and energy partner on our border. It's not going to happen. Sorry, but we're not sorry.
Well, Chay, Anna Baerbock was very blunt about it. She actually, on TV, said, I don't care what my voters think. I'm doing what I believe to be right by Ukraine. As a veteran politician, I could tell you that not caring what your voters think is definitely not the road to political happiness, as many a politician has found out. But on the subject of Germany, the regional election results in Thuringia and in Saxony were a brutal signal to Berlin as to just how unpopular this traffic light coalition, red, green and yellow, is. And their days are very obviously numbered. In fact, I think the demand for early elections in Germany may not be able to be resisted. And now the AfD were the biggest winners, but my friend Sarah Wagenknecht had a great night in both places and has emerged as the kingmaker in both seats. Her position on the Ukraine war, on Russia, on economic and social fronts is very similar to my own. Talk a bit about how you think that will impact on Germany's attitude towards Russia and Ukraine going forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems obvious to me, and it'll be obvious to you and to our viewers, that often parties like AfD which get a bad press, of course, as well. They're cast as this radical, the alternative for Deutschland. They're cast as radical, far-right, dangerous agitators, other parties refusing to go into government with them, which I always find very interesting. That the Christian Democrats, for example, say we will never join with the AfD to create a government. So they completely reject the democratic will of the people. Now, these people who vote for AfD are obviously completely disenfranchised and in disbelief at how the Traffic Light Coalition has completely destroyed and disemboweled Germany's economic growth. Germany is on the precipice of an economic cliff, and this is unprecedented in Germany's history. Even after the two wars, it bounced back very quickly. Germany is now the old man of Europe, and that's according to the German press. Olaf Scholz has become very much a vassal leader when it comes to Ukraine, particularly foreign policy, German foreign policy, which was very independent, very neutral, and very anti-escalatory for most of the Cold War, and in the post-Soviet era. The Germans did try to maintain decent relations with Russia, and of course the Nord Stream pipeline, this incredible joint venture between Europe and Russia to supply exceptionally high quality, exceptionally cheap gas to German industry and to the rest of Europe, was a huge threat to American hegemony in Europe and the domination of Germany. Maybe the old adage, George, correct me if I'm wrong, to keep the Russians out, to keep the Americans in, and keep the Germans down. And this has come to pass. Very much so when you see what's happened now with America becoming a premier supplier of liquefied natural gas into Germany. So we also had to remember Biden saying that if Nord Stream is open, we will end it, we will cut it off. So this is a big issue in Germany. People are starting to see this huge influx of refugees from Ukraine into Germany, as in my own country. And this is having an impact on the paychecks of the German worker. And when you start to annoy the German blue-collar worker, it's quite a unionized society. It's quite an aggressive labor market, if you like. They don't like their jobs impacted, their ability to spend, and their ability to have the lifestyle they like. The Germans do start to march, and they do start to become quite proactive in this. And now, with increasing electricity prices, which are inexorably linked to the destruction of Nord Stream, which nobody in Germany, Nord Stream seems to be the crime that no one wants to admit it even happened. The victim doesn't even want to admit it happened. And the person who did it is kind of laughing in the background. So this is all part of the elevation of AfD, who have radical policies on immigration. Germany's immigration policies, of course, are all predicated on its post-war position that everyone is welcome in Germany. And that's fine, but you still need to have the social infrastructure to welcome everybody. It's very much the same in Ireland. We have a huge immigration problem because we don't have the infrastructure in our society to help all comers. It's not about racism. It's about simply not having the infrastructure, the doctors, the clinics, the homes, the houses, to house these people. It's not the fault of these people, most of whom, and many of which, are fleeing NATO generated wars in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East. So to stop the boats, we need to really stop the wars, George, in my view. And in Germany,
exactly,
they see this in Germany, they see this to end the war in Ukraine is exceptionally important, to bring back economic stability to Europe. But of course, with people like Olaf Scholz, he's very much not the statesman of old, the great German statesman, who actually did put Germany first and say, look, they avoided any kind of escalation. Now we've got German tanks in Kursk again, 81 years later. So it's almost a sort of Orwellian reality has evolved, and the people of Germany have obviously had enough. And of course, with Sarah Wagenknecht as well, an exceptionally talented woman. I've heard her speak several times. Absolute common sense. And one thing AfD and the left have in common now, and as you've talked about this grand alliance of common sense, of focusing on human value, that we end war. It doesn't have to be a left or right thing. It should be a centralized and
No.
an alliance thing. And in Germany, it very much looks like it could be that. And thank God we may get some common sense in Germany, because Germany is still exceptionally influential.
Chay Bowes, as always, a masterclass. Thanks for joining us.